Hello. Welcome to the final night of Impact Symposium 2008, Middle East Meets West. Over the last 3 nights, we have discussed the complex relationship between the U.S. and the Middle East with controversial author Ayaan Hirsi Ali, journalist Gideon Yago, and tonight we have General John Abizaid and scholar Reza Aslan. If this sort of event interests you, there might be a few more events you're interested in that you can attend this week. One of which is the Iraq War film series, which the next installment of which will be on Saturday, March 23rd at 7, and we'll be showing Iraq in fragments. And then tomorrow night in this room at 6 p.m. is the Middle Eastern Student Association night, which will feature remarks by Dr. Jack Shaheen and comedy performance by the Axis of Evil troupe, belly dancers, and food, and that is free for students. And if you're not a student, feel free to pay and come along as well. Tonight we have 2 speakers. One speaker will speak for about a half hour, then the other will speak, and then they'll do a joint Q&A. So save your questions for the end. And first, the Vanderbilt University Speakers Committee is proud to present General John Abizaid, recently retired after 34 years of serving his country, in which he became the youngest 4-star general in the Army and the longest-serving commander of the United States Central Command. Abizaid is widely considered to be an expert in Middle Eastern affairs. Before his assignments at Central Command, which he commanded from 2003 to 2007, General Abizaid served as the ranking 3-star officer at on the Joint Staff as the director of the Joint Staff. During his tenure as director, the Joint Staff advised the Chairman and the Secretary of Defense on the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, homeland security issues, and all military operations worldwide. General Abizaid is a highly decorated officer who has been awarded the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Army Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, and the Bronze Star. He holds military honors from numerous nations, including Germany, France, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, Australia, Afghanistan, and Egypt. And now, without further ado, the Vanderbilt University Speakers Committee is proud to present General John Abizaid.
Well, thanks, everybody. Reeve, thank you for the introduction. Appreciate it. Reza, I'm happy to be here with you, I think. We'll find out. If you're a veteran of the United States Armed Forces, could you stand up? Could we recognize people that are veterans, thank them for their service? And if you're associated with the ROTC program, could you stand up? Thank you for your willingness to serve the country. And what I'm going to do here tonight, hopefully, is give you a chance to see the Middle East from the perspective of an officer that served there nearly half my career. Served in Jordan, I served in Lebanon, I served in Israel, I've served in Iraq, Afghanistan. I've been to almost all of those 27 countries in this area that you see on the map behind us. And I've spent a lot of time fighting in the Middle East. My son served in the Army, and he spent some time in the region. My daughter serves in a position where she's frequently in the Middle East. And my other daughter's husband has served there and been wounded there. I mean, when you consider the experience of my family, where at one point I was in Qatar, my son-in-law was in Afghanistan, my son was in Korea, my daughter was in Beirut, my wife was saying, why are we so involved in the Middle East? And I think that's what I'm going to have a chance to talk to you about here tonight is what we're doing in the Middle East, what are the broader issues going on there, and then during the question and answer period, hope to have a chance to talk about specifically Iraq, Afghanistan, but I'm not going to focus just on Iraq or Afghanistan. I'm going to focus on the broader issues that are afoot in the region, issues that the next president of the United States is going to have to confront no matter what. And I would beware of the notion of staying in Iraq or going from Iraq. It's too simple. It's much more complex than that. It's much more difficult than that. It's tied to a whole lot of very, very different dynamics in the region, and I hope to give you some idea of how I see that. This area of the world that you see up here behind me on the map, pretty interesting area. Now, so you know, the armed forces of the United States divides the world up into various chunks. There's a European command, there's a Pacific command, there's a North American command, there's a Southern command, and there's the Central Command. And the Central Command deals with these 27 different countries that range from up here, if you can see this, Kazakhstan, down on through Pakistan, across Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, middle of the Arabian Peninsula, and the Horn of Africa. It's a fascinating area, and it's an area where right now we have about 250,000 of our young men and women under arms dealing with the various problems that we have presented them with. And it is an area of great turmoil, an area where terrorism is endemic, where very difficult ideological movements are afoot that are not friendly to the United States and indeed are not friendly to many of the various legitimate regimes that operate in the region. It's an area where the greatest flow of capital wealth in the history of the world is moving to. If you look at what's going on here in the Persian Gulf and you think about how much you paid for gas here recently, and you think about how much a barrel of oil costs today, that flow of money is going into these small countries along the Arabian Gulf, to this country on the Persian Gulf, to Iraq, Saudi Arabia, other oil-producing countries in the region. It's also not only an area where the most wealthy societies on earth exist per capita, it's also a place where the poorest societies on earth exist per capita. And it's an area that I said is in turmoil and will probably continue to stay in turmoil. We should beware of the notion that the United States of America can control this region, but we should also be mindful of the need to help the people in the region help themselves against the many problems if we are going to be part of this great globalizing experiment that's going on in the world today and have an opportunity for it to come out successfully. Now, these 27 different countries start up here in Kazakhstan, made famous by Borat. You all had an opportunity to see that great movie. It has absolutely nothing to do with Kazakhstan, which is, of course, a very interesting and prosperous country moving at the center of the Eurasian landmass in a very, very interesting way. It includes Pakistan and Afghanistan, where we currently have great difficulties going on, and we know that Pakistan is a nuclear-armed country. And right here in Iraq, 5 years of war in Iraq, 7 years of war in the Middle East. In the beginning of 2000, we had about 25,000 troops in the region. At one point, we were well over 300 to 400,000, and today we're there with about 250,000. Now, it used to be that this region that was assigned to the commander of the Central Command did not include these two countries, Syria and Lebanon. And interestingly enough, you'll note that Israel is not part of this region that's assigned to the military commander. And these 25 countries that were assigned, it so happened one day when I first took command that Secretary Rumsfeld called me up and he said, General Abizaid, I noticed that Syria and Lebanon are not in your area of operations. And I want to know, what is your opinion about adding them to your area of operations? And I said, well, Mr. Secretary, we've got a war in Iraq, we've got a war in Afghanistan, got piracy off of Somalia, we've got difficulties all over this region that are too numerous to count. And all things being equal, I'd just soon not take those two countries, leave them where they are. So, those of you who heard this rumor that the Secretary of Defense and the military commanders didn't communicate, well, you know now that that's not true. We did communicate. And he listened to me, and then he said, well, thank you very much, you've got them. And I said, well, thanks, Mr. Secretary, could you give me Haiti and North Korea while you're at it? And fortunately for me, he did not. But let's take a look at this region and some of the things that are going on here. And if I can figure out how to move to the next slide. There it is. It used to be I had 2,000 people to move the slide projector around for me. Now it's just me. And I like it better this way. You look at the region and you see all these very, very difficult things going on. And we could put up 1,000 different problem areas that are going on in this region, but they're very, very dynamic. They're very interesting. Over in here you have essentially a genocide going on in Sudan. Up here the Arab-Israeli problem. Lebanon has got governance problems, all sorts of stability problems associated with what's happening in Iraq, coming on over in here where you have Shia and Sunni forces lining up against one another, and then on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border area, very, very difficult times there as well. And I think, you can look at all of the problems in the Middle East and you can get lost in the minutia of it. There are serious problems. There's a lot of problems. There are difficult problems. We can't solve all of them. As a matter of fact, we probably can't solve many of them. But on the other hand, we can shape the outcome. And I've come to look at this battle not as the clash of civilizations that people want to talk about so often, but more a clash of globalization, where the forces that want to integrate into the globalizing planet are facing the threats from those who do not want globalization to take place. It's the integrators versus the disintegrators in a way that I think is very, very interesting. And it is essential, in my view, for United States power, and by that I don't mean just military power, but United States military, economic, diplomatic, political, educational, and informational power to help shape the outcome so the people in the region have a chance to participate in the benefits of a globalizing planet. As I said before, don't try to control this region. The British couldn't control it. The Romans couldn't control it. We can't control it. But we can provide leadership and help shape the outcome in a way that I think is important. Now, I think it's important for us to understand that there's 4 what I would consider major geostrategic imperatives at play in this region. And they are problems that will not go away between now and November when we elect a new president, nor will they go away between now and January where a new president stands up and takes the oath of office. These 4 problems, in the order that I see them as being of concern to us, are points that we all need to understand, because whether we like it or not, we're going to be involved in this part of the world for a long time. Now, the first geostrategic problem in reality that we have to understand that's moving in the Middle East is one that's very, very important to us and very dangerous to us, and it's the rise of Sunni extremist activity as exemplified by people such as bin Laden and groups such as Al-Qaeda. The Sunni extremism, and I know many of my Muslim friends do not even like me to use the word extremism and Islam together, but this is a highly religious movement that is outside of mainstream Islam, yet is a movement that has as its goal the domination of the region. And it is a very interesting movement. It's a capable movement. It's one that we need to pay attention to. And it is a movement where small groups of people throughout the region have figured out how to get together and operate on terrorist basis and other extranational basis without having a nation state to really support them. This form of a organization such as Al-Qaeda, which is empowered by the internet, empowered by the virtual space, yet also one that is led by charismatic people and organized loosely, is a movement that we need to face squarely and understand what its goals are. It desires to move American power out of the region, not because it's necessarily anti-American, as much as it is very, very interested in obtaining control in the region, obtain geographical control at some point, at some time. It is their belief that over a long period of history, they can be successful in pushing American power out of the region. In that, they will then weaken the legitimate governments of the region. They'll be able to find a place where they can become mainstream, and then from there, they will move on to global domination. This is what they believe. And if you want to know what they believe, don't just listen to me. Get on their websites, see what they say. There's an incredible amount of information available in the virtual space that talks about what their goals are, what they decide to do, how they decide to do it, what's important to them. And it is clear when you read what they say and then you see what they do that they are very intent on accomplishing a very long-term and difficult problem for domination of the region. in approaching it in a way that we all need to pay attention to. Now, Al-Qaeda as an organization is not like a military organization that we have seen in other battles of the 21st century that we fought earlier or of the 20th century that we fought previously. It's an organization that's loosely aligned, that has adherents that are not only in the Middle East, but also in Europe and South America, throughout North America. They are able to operate globally, and they have a way to recruit, train, finance, and operate that we need to pay attention to. We should note that it is an extremely unusual event for a non-state actor to be able to generate military power that allows it to attack the United States of America like it did back on September 11th, 2001. And it also figure out how to generate attack in Britain, an attack in Indonesia, and almost every one of these countries up here on this map behind me have in some way or another had to bear the problem of an Al-Qaeda or an Al-Qaeda associated attack. It is an ideological movement, not unlike other ideological movements that have plagued the earth before, communism or fascism. It's a movement that's at the beginning of its cycle, and it's one that we should do whatever we can to prevent from becoming mainstream. Because I believe if this movement were to become mainstream in the region, we would then start to realize our fears of a clash of civilizations, and we must avoid that at all costs. Now, you can ask, how are we doing against Al-Qaeda? And it's a fair question. We have had periods of great success, and we have had periods of not so great success. It's an enemy that's hard to get your hands around. It is an enemy that is, as I said, stateless. It operates in small groups. There's no capital to capture. There's no army to destroy. Yet it is a group of people that manages to expand its influence in the region and affect outcomes as they affected the outcome of the Spanish elections a few years back, as they affect the outcome of the political situation in Pakistan. And what is interesting about Al-Qaeda as an organization is that they have figured out how to operate in the virtual space in a way that gives them great power and breadth that we haven't seen in an organization like this in a long time. Now, an additional danger that we need to recognize is the fact that this region does have nuclear weapons. And in particular, in the Pakistan area, the Pakistanis have nuclear weapons. And it is here where today Al-Qaeda in particular has managed to grab a foothold in the federally administered tribal areas and the northwest frontier areas. That should give not only the Pakistanis concern, but all of us. Because Al-Qaeda has said over and over and over again that they desire to obtain a weapon of mass destruction so they can use it against our interests or the interests of our friends and partners in the region. And it is this sort of problem that we need to pay attention to, because it is not out of the realm of the possible that in a period of great instability politically in Pakistan, that the weapons could be transferred either intentionally or unintentionally into the hands of people that intend to bring them our way. And so while the weapon of mass destruction argument was discredited as a result of our operations in Iraq and the intelligence indications of Iraq, I can tell you that a group of terrorists really don't matter in the world unless they can achieve a breakthrough in becoming mainstream within the population of the region or acquire a weapon of mass destruction, and it requires our constant vigilance and confrontation. This ideological movement of Al-Qaeda has provided ample evidence everywhere to list their goals and their desires very, very clearly. And just as if in the 20s we had paid attention to what Hitler said in Mein Kampf, we have the same opportunity today to pay attention to what bin Laden and Zawahiri and others in this movement say, and we should believe them. We should give them credit for being resourceful, resilient, aggressive, and determined, and we need to pay attention to ways to help empower the people in the region who don't want to live under Al-Qaeda rule to resist the draw of this type of extremism. Now, Where al-Qaeda or their allies have become ascendant, such as Afghanistan, they provided a basis of soccer stadiums for people to go to be executed in. They destroyed national monuments. They banned music. They did not allow women to participate in any form of anything within their own societies. And it quickly wears on people, just like happened out in Al-Anbar province in Iraq. It happened in Afghanistan. But on the other hand, we need to also understand that in places where it's very, very difficult, this ideology can attract people, and we see that hardening itself right now in the Afghan-Pakistan border area in a way that continues to be dangerous for us. As al-Qaeda has come under pressure here and here and here and elsewhere in the region, it's clear that al-Qaeda cells and organization move to the ungoverned spaces of the planet. This problem doesn't just exist in the Middle East. It exists in Europe, where al-Qaeda has essentially an intellectual safe haven to operate from. And it exists in pretty much every country on earth. And it requires, as I said, constant international cooperation in terms of counterterrorism and intelligence sharing and vigilance. So problem number one, the rise of Sunni extremism. And I spent a lot of time on it because I think it is such a difficult problem for us that we need to understand what it's about and what has to be done to confront it. Problem number two is also an ideological problem, but it's an ideological problem that comes from a different direction. It comes from the nation state of Iran. And it comes from the nation state of Iran in the form of Shia revolutionary extremism that also is implacably opposed to the United States and our friends and allies in the region. And Iranian Shia extremism, revolutionary extremism, is one that we have been confronting for some time, that will continue to confront us for some time, but one that is attached to a nation state that makes it easier to deal with in many respects from that associated with bin Laden and his extremist organization that's spread out throughout the world. Iranian extremism is probably at the end of its ideological curve. If bin Laden's at the beginning, I believe that the government of the mullahs in Iran, which is very complicated, has very many different power centers, etc., I believe that this government over time will continue to atrophy because the people in the country don't really believe in its strength or its wisdom. And that over time containment of Iran offers an opportunity to allow this atrophy to eventually move to the point where the Iranian people change the Iranian government and move into a position where they rejoin the community of nations of the Middle East. Sunni extremism, bin Laden. Shia extremism, Iran. And the Iranian reach is interesting to see. You see it in places such as eastern Afghanistan, southern Iraq, eastern Saudi Arabia, southern Lebanon, places where Shia communities are well established, where Iran seeks to control the agenda, the political and geopolitical agenda of the region to the extent that it can. And Iranian intelligence operatives and Iranian military activity is such that it presents great problems for the Arab states in the region, the other states in the region, and for American power in particular in the region. The third big problem is one that you see on the news at least once a week, and it has to do with the continued corrosive effect of the Arab-Israeli problem. The Palestinian-Israeli problem requires our close attention. It requires the leadership of the United States of America to deal with diplomatically, to move to a place where not only can Israel be protected as a nation state, but where Palestinian aspirations can be achieved. It is absolutely essential that the next president of the United States take whatever momentum comes from the current peace process and continue it in his or her first term, first year in office, and not wait until the end of their term in office to continue momentum towards peace in that particular part of the world. Sunni extremism, bin Laden, Shia extremism, Iran, the Arab-Israeli problem. These three problems are problems that anyone that's elected in November are going to have to deal with, and have to deal with not over a period of months, but over a period of decades. The final problem is one that you deal with every day, that you go and put gas in your car. It's the problem of continued reliance on Middle Eastern energy supplies, which severely restrict our geopolitical maneuver room in that particular part of the world. It's absolutely essential that over time we figure out how to wean ourselves away from continued reliance on Middle Eastern oil in particular, but conservation, new technologies, new opportunities to wean ourselves away from hydrocarbons is essential for the long-term interest of the United States and indeed all of the developing world. Otherwise, we tie ourselves to the constant instability that's prevalent in this particular part of the world. So I've outlined these four problems, and I haven't really talked about Iraq or Afghanistan and how they fit into this. But it's my view that in both Iraq and Afghanistan, in some way or another, they have something to do with these particular problems. Clearly, al-Qaeda plays in both places in a very, very big way. Clearly, al-Qaeda has a desire to keep instability in the forefront in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Clearly, al-Qaeda is looking for an opportunity to gain ascendancy within the Arab Shia community or Sunni community in Iraq and within the Pashtun communities of southern Afghanistan and eastern Afghanistan. Whether or not they can do it in the long run will depend upon the resilience of the governments of Afghanistan and Iraq, the performance of their own armed forces, and eventually the way that the United States manages to hand over the burden of confronting these particular problems. With regard to the Iranian threat, it's very, very clear to me that we must continue to contain Iranian power. We have to understand that the Iranians do confront us militarily in Iraq. They do confront us indirectly militarily in southern Lebanon. They do confront us in other places around the Middle East. But we can equal that confrontation with limited military means, contain Iranian power, and give the Iranian people a chance to move in a better direction in a government that is not so ideologically supported by the current mullah regime that exists in Tehran. And I think that is something that we need to keep in mind. We have to confront al-Qaeda daily with military force, if necessary, and help increase counter-terrorist and counterinsurgency capacity of the various governments that are involved in fighting it. And by the way, almost every one of these countries in this region confronts al-Qaeda in some fashion or another. In Saudi Arabia, they're fighting. In Pakistan, they're fighting. In Uzbekistan, they're fighting. In almost every one of these countries, in some way or another, this threat is being met not only by the people in the region, but also with the support of the United States. Contain Iranian power, move the Arab-Israeli peace process forward, wean ourselves away over time of this terrible dependence that we have on Middle Eastern oil. These are the strategic directions that we must move. Now, how are we doing? It's been a long time. We've been fighting there for a long time under very difficult circumstances. We've lost a lot of young men and women. We've had an awful lot of young men and women have very, very serious wounds that are life-changing. But if I thought that there was a way to move away from this region and just let it alone, I would tell you what I thought it would be. But I just can't figure out how American power can leave the region to its own devices and at the same time ensure the success of our own republic and democracy. I think that we have to figure out, first and foremost, how to reduce the amount of our military force in the region by empowering people in the region to take care of the security threats over time. But this requires the building of institutions, responsible institutions, institutions that don't terrorize their own people but are accountable to their own people. And I've also come to the conclusion that accountability is something that is moving forward in this part of the world. And one of the reasons it's moving forward is the same sort of thing that Al-Qaeda has exploited with regard to the internet and the virtual space, and that is that people have the opportunity to see what the rest of the world is doing. They want to join the developing world. They want to be part of the integrating world. They want to be part of this great globalizing experiment, and they want to be part of it in a way that allows them to seek a better future for their kids and their grandkids, just like we do. There is a common bond between us in not allowing the extremists, whether they're Iranian Shia or Sunni extremists of bin Laden's ilk, to become ascendant in this particular part of the world. Now, in Iraq, it has been a long and difficult struggle. In particular, we have today over 160,000 troops there. But we have to learn that military force buys time. And military force buys time for the other instruments of national power to come to bear. The State Department, USAID, various other non-governmental organizations that can help the people in the region help themselves. This form of national and international soft power needs to be employed in the region in a much more coordinated and synchronized fashion if we are to confront the extremists over the long run. We tend to look at the world through 5-second sound bites. They tend to look at the world through 500-year chunks of history. It's important that we become as patient as we are courageous in dealing with these particular problems in the region. And it's important that we insist from our new political leaders that we figure out how to make the State Department more effective in this part of the world, how to bring more economic development to the tough places, how to be able to get more non-governmental organizations and charities brought to bear against these very, very difficult problems. Because if we do not, we will continually find ourselves with military force as our primary choice of way of influencing this very difficult and dangerous situation in this particular part of the world. And it is my contention that it is not military force alone that will allow us to be successful out there. Now, the good news is, and there's a lot of good news, that progress has moved forward in Iraq. It's been slow, it's been painful, it's been difficult, but over the past year in particular, there are signs of some reconciliation. There are signs of increasing capacity of the security forces of Iraq to handle more and more over time. There's signs that the economic problems between the Sunni, the Shia, and the Kurds can be resolved. But again, none of these things will be solved easily or quickly, and they'll require a tremendous amount of patience and courage on the part of the United States of America to deal with. It doesn't mean that our forces can't come down, but it does mean that economic development, political, diplomatic, educational help to these countries that are in such grave need of it have to be brought forward in a way that is not only effective but coordinated, synchronized, and also synchronized with the rest of the international community. So we're making progress in Iraq. Too soon to say that the progress is absolutely going to be successful, but I would say that given time, we will be successful there in as much as the Iraqi government comes together as a government of national unity, which of course is an easy thing to say, but a hard thing to achieve. In Afghanistan, the situation has probably deteriorated over the past year, and it's deteriorated because of problems associated with security on the Pakistani side of the border, where the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have been allowed to become more successful and more capable in a region that's very, very difficult to get at. I'm also confident that with NATO involved in Afghanistan, with the continued presence of American support of the NATO mission, that Afghanistan will slowly but surely stabilize. The one hope that I can't offer you is that any of these problems will be solved easily or quickly. I can give you hope that only the United States of America has the power to take the leadership, to confront the extremists, to deal with the problems of Arab-Israeli peace, and ultimately to find a way to wean ourselves away from this debilitating dependence on Middle Eastern oil. We can do it, and we absolutely must ask our new political leaders to address these issues not from the specifics of what's happening in downtown Baghdad, but from what we need to do to make our children and our children's children more secure by moving the Middle East forward in a more positive direction. And I believe we can do that. I think, in closing, the most important thing I'll say to you tonight is that there are a lot of good young men and women that are coming back from the region that have served their country honorably, admirably. They are courageous, they're capable, they're committed. If you're an employer, bring them into your team. If you're a student and you see a veteran, bring them into your classroom. If you're any member of the society, please bring these veterans back home with honor and dignity. Don't treat them the way that we treated our returning Vietnam veterans. Treat them with the honor and the dignity that they deserve. They went to fight in the Middle East because we collectively sent them there. They have done a great job. Sure, we've made some mistakes at some times, but I can tell you that you would be enormously proud of what they do, how they've done it. They are ferocious in combat, and they're compassionate when they need to be. It's been an awful lot that we have put on their shoulders. We need to broaden the shoulders of the American people to assume some of that burden from them. Thank you very much.